Hello, and welcome to another Engage Arlington virtual learning series on Amazon. I'm Roger Munter. I'm Arlington's Director of Public Engagement, and I'm sitting in as your host tonight. And with me here in the studio, we have Christina Winn from Arlington Economic Development, Anthony Fusarelli from our Community Planning, Housing, and Development Department, and over here, Sally Duran. She is the Chair of the Economic Development Commission, and Alex Iams, who is also from Arlington Economic Development. So this is the second of the series of virtual learning sessions that we've been doing. We're here to share information with the Arlington community and listen to some questions. In our first one, a couple of weeks ago, we focused on sort of the broad view of Amazon's announcement. And tonight, we're going to start taking a closer look at some of the topics that are involved in this. So tonight, we're going to do sort of a deep dive into economic planning, development, and look at, how this affects people in the community in terms of economic development, and also how it dovetails with some of the planning that we've been doing for many years. So for those of you joining us online tonight, we encourage you to use your chat box to offer questions for us here in the studio. We'd love to hear what you think. And for everyone, please introduce yourself. Tell us what neighborhood you're from, any organization you're affiliated with. We're also going to have a text number you can send questions in by text. So while you're introducing yourselves on that side, we'll kind of jump into the conversation on this side. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of economic development here in a minute, but it's sort of been a long 2 weeks. So why don't we go back and do a quick recap and talk about what actually happened back on November 13th.
Absolutely. So thank you, and thank you for having me. So I still think I'm like pinching myself, right? It was 2 weeks ago today that we actually got the call from Amazon that they had selected Arlington for one of two headquarter campuses, which meant that they were going to be bringing 25,000 jobs, or creating 25,000 jobs, and filling anywhere from 4 million to 8 million square feet and investing $2.5 billion. And the site that they had selected was what has become known as National Landing. And just a little background for folks, you may have read about it in the paper. National Landing was the name that we actually used to pitch Amazon for sites that were in Crystal City as well as Pentagon City and our partners in Alexandria and Potomac Yard. It would have been confusing, I think, to Amazon as a customer, as if we tried to explain in a proposal these different submarkets. And so it was much easier to talk about the whole site as National Landing. But I still can't believe it myself.
Yeah, is anybody else pinching themselves still at this point after 2 weeks?
Well, they kept us in suspense, that's for sure. We didn't find out before the announcement. It was probably 24 hours notice or so, if that. And then came the mobilization for the announcement itself. And then to be in a warehouse in Pentagon City really was kind of a surreal moment, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it was even funny because while we felt like we were getting closer to the selection or the decision process, it was like every day, I think all of us would wake up and say, like, is this the day that we're going to learn, that, Amazon has made a decision, and are they going to actually have picked us? Because we had put 14 months of work into pitching what we thought was a world-class proposal.
Wow.
So
let's go back even further a little bit. Sally, I want to turn to you because you're in sort of an interesting perspective on this. You at the Economic Development Commission have been working on things like this for a number of years, I would say.
Actually, we started working on this in 2010. I joined the Economic Development Commission at that time. I'm actually an insurance consultant, and we saw that the county was no longer competitive. We had become too complacent. We were focused on Metro. We were focused on the federal workforce. And we put together a task force within the Economic Development Commission, which I participated in. And we went to the county and called the Competitiveness Task Force, and we said, we need a new strategy. We coined the phrase the innovation economy. We said we needed to diversify, and we need to do it now, and we need to really get much more competitive. And that was one of the first steps in having the county rethink where the strategy was going. And the good part was very embraced by the county leadership, so we were really happy about that.
Let's kind of, for viewers who maybe don't know what the Economic Development Commission is, just give us a little backstory. What is this commission? Who are you? And what are you doing?
Well, we are 25 citizens and business representatives all across the community. There's an urban myth that we're all developers, which is totally not true. We have biotech, we have defense, we have education, we have workforce, we have hotels. We do have developers, we have multifamily, so we try very hard to have a cross-section of individuals and people with different expertise to represent the community. And our mission, we are a little bit unique. Our mission is to advise the county board. We are to look ahead and see what the needs of the county are to try and retain our prosperity as a community and look at the interests of citizens, businesses, and actually tourists, because people don't know it, but we're the number one entrance into the state of Virginia for tourism. It's a huge part of our economy.
So when the EDC is kind of coming to us and saying we need to diversify our economy, how did that resonate, inside the county?
Absolutely. I mean, actually, I'm from a lot of the work that Alex had done, and because of the result of BRAC, the Base Realignment and Closure Act in 2005, the county, recognized Arlington Economic Development recognized that there was this huge dependency upon the federal government. And so they started to lay out the groundwork with the EDC about this innovation economy and identified targeted industries that we were going to go after. So things like cyber tech, big data, clean and green, education tech, and financial tech were industries that we wanted to strategically go out and do national and regional recruiting to attract these types of companies too. And since then, really, that has been a very successful strategy, because we have companies now like Nestle, Lidl, Applied Predictive Technologies has expanded, OPower, did expand it and got bought by Oracle. Grant Thornton came, so we have all these different industries now that are not just the federal government.
So you talk about BRAC, and that brings up an interesting point, that we're adding a lot of jobs, but we're also kind of getting back to a point we were several years ago. Is that true?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. And when the action occurred in 2005, we stood to lose 17,000 jobs and 4.2 million square feet of office space across Arlington. And 13,000 of those jobs and about 3.2 million square feet of office space was actually located in Crystal City. So it was very important that Arlington County started to plan for the next generation of buildings and actual users within buildings in Crystal City. And not only that, but we have also lost other federal agency presences like the National Science Foundation, and we were actually stand to lose another one in the Transportation Security Administration. So when you total all that up, it is in excess of 25,000 jobs and 4 million square feet.
So we have a question coming in from Facebook, actually. So this is not quite on point, but broadly, Joseph is asking about middle-class housing. I'm wondering if we could just talk a little bit broadly about how Amazon coming here is going to affect middle-class housing, as part of this deal.
Okay.
Certainly. I'll take a first cut at that. So I think one of the things that we've looked at as part of this very exciting announcement, particularly from a planning perspective, is the potential that this infusion of jobs over 10 to 12 years into this area, what are the types of impacts and initiative that might bring to additional development of homes and residences throughout the county, whether they be in the Crystal City, Pentagon City area proper, or within abutting areas of Columbia Pike and elsewhere. So from one of the things our department focuses on is housing from a number of perspectives. There's the affordable housing priority that the board is focused on and that a lot of our work focuses on, but we also are in the midst of kind of embarking on sort of an effort around missing middle housing and kind of looking for creative solutions and strategies to try and find ways to add different types of housing that perhaps haven't been developed in Arlington for quite some time that could meet more of the need that is even here today, right. Let alone what we might see in the future.
I think what also is really interesting was during this Amazon process, the whole site selection process, all around, like the different groups, the whole region, as they were all making, right. They were a finalist, they were all in the top 20, and they recognized things like housing and like metro funding were going to be issues, right? That how could you actually attract an employer like Amazon if you had these issues? But like Metro, they came up with a solution and to be able to work together as a region. But one of the other things that we saw was all of these really regional housing partners come together to start to have deeper and more in-depth discussions about how can we solve housing as a region at all levels, the affordable housing, the missing middle. Right. And so I think what we're going to see is more efforts going on towards that to not only do what Arlington is doing at a local level, but what the region is doing to help fix the issue.
Mm-hmm. And looking at this, one of the things that we learned that historically only 20% of the population of Arlington has actually lived and worked here. So 80% of the workforce has always been coming from other jurisdictions. And so I think the expectation is with Amazon coming, there will be many of their employees that will actually be living in other jurisdictions and using metro and transportation to get here. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be, it's not going to have as big an impact on housing as some people might think.
I want to mention that we're going to have another of these sessions yes. on January 16th, which is going to focus entirely on housing, and many of these issues will come up, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. So hopefully Joseph and others will be jumping back in when that happens. But we're also getting a lot of chatter about the labor market. How is Amazon's coming here going to impact our labor market? And maybe we can even look at it in sort of the shorter term, the 2 years mm-hmm. down the line, 5 years down the line, 10, 20.
Sure, I'll start on that. It's a labor market currently of over 3 million jobs, and it produces something like 50,000 new jobs on average each year. So this will obviously help diversify that job base. It will not overwhelm that job base. It will be gradual and over time. So if you think about 25,000 jobs coming in over the first 12 years or so, you're something, on average over 2,000 jobs a year. But in the first couple of years, somewhere between 500 and 1,500. So it's going to be, going to be very helpful for a region that has been losing federal government jobs, but very helpful for the diversification goal. Mm-hmm. And as far as the labor market itself is finding and hiring workers, one of the reasons that Amazon chose, and probably the #1 reason that they chose mm-hmm. this area, is for the existing skills of the workforce that is here. So the education levels and the technical skills of the people who are already working in this area. They will have to do some recruitment from out of state, obviously, for certain positions. Just to hire that many people in a very tight labor market, obviously, will require some people coming in from out of state. But they really want to come for a lot of the jobs that are here, and so you will see movement around in the labor market, but I don't believe it'll be disruptive.
Mm-hmm. But the other thing that's really super important about this is that the state has, as part of their incentive package, has committed really up to $1 billion in towards education. So a large portion of that mm-hmm. is going to be in a performance-based, not a performance incentive fund to all Virginia universities right. that they can actually apply for funds to help increase the number of bachelor's and master's degrees that are coming out of our universities. So they're anticipating that this will be 25,000 to 35,000 new graduates that are going to be coming out. And then you also have the investment that they made into the Virginia Tech Innovation Campus, which is in the south end of National Landing, as well as the George Mason University campus in Virginia Square, which is going to now be hosting Masters in Computer Science, as well as Entrepreneurship and Innovation. So I think part of what the messaging is that because we all got to see what Amazon's effect was on Seattle, was when we were putting together the, Alexandria, Arlington, and the state were putting together a proposal, we had the benefit of really looking at what was going on in Amazon and to really come up with an incentive and investments to help manage any potential impacts that may come. So the labor force, while we have a significant, amazing labor force, which is why we were attracted here, but we also wanted to supplement that to increase so that it wouldn't become a problem.
So we're really looking at sort of generational impacts that are going very much to what you talked about at the beginning, making more innovation
long-term
economy.
prosperity, yes.
So speaking of long-term, I want to kind of turn over to Anthony here and talk about planning, because this didn't just suddenly happen. So talk a little bit about how Amazon coming here fits in with a lot of the planning that your department has been doing now for several years.
Yeah, absolutely. So from a planning perspective, I think the announcement 2 weeks back was a very exciting one. When you think about where Crystal City and Pentagon City have come from, each of those areas growing together over the period of 40 plus years, but in their own ways, right? Crystal City was largely developed, much of it, according to one developer's vision, a visionary, gentleman who had an idea and advanced that idea, one large block at a time, and over time, Crystal City, was there. Pentagon City, actually, its planning routes kind of are a little bit different in the fact that, in the mid-1970s, the county board approved a master development plan for all of Pentagon City, or almost all of Pentagon City, roughly 116 acres, which became the Pentagon City Phased Development Site Plan. And that plan has really been implemented, not fully, but mostly implemented over the past 40 years. So when we look at those two areas together, in many ways, the manner in which those areas have grown and evolved have really blurred the lines in many ways between Crystal and Pentagon City, and are often referred to as sort of Arlington's Route 1 corridor. I think the decision that Amazon has made in terms of the locations they're targeting and planning to go to, actually spanning Crystal City and Pentagon City, will only strengthen the extent to which those areas really function as one place. Getting back to the 2005 BRAC Base Realignment and Closure Commission decisions, the BRAC Transition Task Force, one of the key recommendations of that report was to undertake a vision plan for Crystal City. Right. And so back in 2006, the county did just that. And working with the community, over the course of 4 years, we developed, I think, a visionary plan that really looked out 40 years in terms of what Crystal City could become, to keep it relevant, to keep it the county's a main economic engine of the county, but to also leverage the potential for additional investment, both public and private, in making Crystal City a better place, kind of building from the strengths it already has, and sort of leveraging that into public improvements. And I think, Amazon coming to Crystal and Pentagon City is, really a catalyst. It can be a catalyst to help advance a lot of the planning we have underway for the area.
I think what's also, everything that Anthony just really explained is when we were going through the proposal process and we had started to put together this joint site. When we do economic development, we really work closely with, our team in CPHD to make sure that we're presenting a real estate site that actually can handle that type of company. And so we looked throughout the past 14 months, we really have been evaluating and then making sure that this area could manage that growth and see that development because it was planned for that.
Just to build on that point, one of the things that our our department is involved in on a regular basis is working with our neighboring jurisdictions across the region on a regular basis to update sort of our cooperative forecasts. And just looking in at sort of Crystal City and Pentagon City alone, our current forecasts out through 25 for the development that we might see in that area, if you combine what we think would happen in residential and office development, approaches around 20 million square feet between now and 2045. And so that, I think, speaks to pretty clearly the significant growth potential that is still within the Route 1 corridor and can really benefit from the existing infrastructure we have in place.
So, speaking of growth and development, we've got a few questions coming in here, and this is actually my big question too. Anna and Joe are saying, what is the actual timeline for Amazon moving? What are we going to see, and when are we going to see it?
I'm happy to speak to maybe the near term, and then if you want to approach the longer term. So we expect that over the course of 2019, the board has an action it needs to take probably no earlier than February regarding kind of the performance agreement. But beyond that, our understanding is that Amazon would start to have workers fill some of the vacant office space that's currently in Crystal City, in close proximity to Metro. And so there would be 2 existing buildings that would undergo interior renovations and to accommodate roughly 250,000 square feet of office space for that first group of employees. There's another existing office building along Crystal Drive in Crystal City that is anticipated to undergo more extensive renovations, and with the idea that that building would fill out an additional 250,000 square feet during the 2020 timeframe. Beyond that, really it's a matter of looking at new construction opportunities really just to the west of Crystal City and the Pentagon City areas. And we would anticipate starting to see the development applications for those be submitted to our office early 2019. And then we would go from there. The construction of those projects, if everything went according to some of the schedules that have been conceived, those buildings might be ready for occupancy 2 to 3 years from now.
So we're not really going to see a lot of change for a while now.
No, I think it's the first couple of years is going to be a slow ramp up, and as I think then, as Alex had mentioned earlier, then they start to gradually start to build on about 2,000 employees a year, to eventually get to 25,000 employees like 12 years from now. So it is a very slow growth, and it's especially slow in the beginning years. Giving us ample time to manage everything.
Right. So we have another couple of kind of planning questions here. Adam is asking, is Arlington thinking about making zoning more flexible for residential and commercial development uses?
So I think that's absolutely a great question. I think one of the things that we've been hearing in recent years from the development community is, are there opportunities to think about land use differently? Sometimes we have instances in Crystal City proper where the We Work, We Live building is sort of a vertical mixed-use building that took a little bit of creative problem solving, I think, to kind of work out the details of how to accommodate those uses. We have other instances where the idea of or extended stay hotel have been approved as part of residential units. So I think independent of the Amazon decision, these are questions that are already being raised, and I would say we're probably going to be tasked with continuing to think these through and determine if there are strategies or recommendations to bring forward to the board for their consideration.
Along those lines, the county held a multifamily task force last year or so, and it was focused on the corridor in Crystal City and also Ballston. And one of the issues that always comes up is parking. I had no idea how passionate, I mean, I kind of knew, but parking and dog parks, I don't know which one would be first or second. But one of the things that comes up from a zoning and a cost of building a unit is parking. And when I was sort of shocked to find out is it's between $40,000 and $60,000 on average for an underground parking space in construction. And and in Crystal City, apparently there are many vacant parking spaces. So if we could have a little more flexible zoning, there might be some ways to use the space more appropriately, but also it drives, and I know you're going to talk about it another week or two, housing. Because if you want to have, I say housing for all stages and ages, that is affordable, then you have to look at the unit cost. And one of the ways that you drive down those costs is to have more flexible planning that's sort of tailored for the future and not for the past.
So here's another good question that kind of goes back to this issue of diversifying our economy. I have a question from Donna, who says, are public sector tech skills transferable to Amazon? So maybe all those people who are getting out of jobs from the federal government or other public sector, can they transfer those skills to Amazon coming in?
Well, that's something that we've certainly seen in the past. I mean, Amazon is bringing tech jobs to Arlington. There are lots of other companies that have brought tech jobs to Arlington, and lots of other people who have transferred their skills from the federal government, state government, or local government to the private sector. And again, I think that's one of the reasons that this area ranks so highly in the technical skills, scientific skills, and all of the things that Amazon was looking for when they came here. You know, there is still a very large federal presence here, and many federal contractors here who possess the technical and scientific skills. And so I would say certainly they would be transferable to a company like Amazon.
So if you have people worried that they're going to be looking to hire from kind of outside the area, or if there's a perception in Silicon Valley that I don't know, government isn't entrepreneurial, they came here for a reason, is what you're saying, and the reason is the talent that we have on hand.
The core of the workforce that's here, yeah, and I think as Christina said, filling in some of the entry-level positions with new college graduates is something that's going to happen with the Amazon workforce out of the university presences that have already been building up in this area and now will only be further built up with the Virginia Tech and George Mason programs.
While I have a second here, I want to hop back to the question of office vacancy and the office vacancy rate and how Amazon coming here is going to affect that or help us with that issue and maybe phased over time again.
Yeah, so as you know, the starting place is many empty existing buildings. What's really good for our bottom line as a community is filling the buildings, yes, but also the construction of the new buildings. So 6 million or 4 million square feet of office space, whether it's new construction or filled office space, still has a benefit to the community bottom line, where we're able to then invest in things like housing and schools and transportation. And so while the vacancy rate is very important and we want to bring in as many companies as we can that are going to fill up those empty buildings, in this case, that it involves a significant amount of new construction is also a very good thing for us. In total, once this process or once their path of growth has been fulfilled, we could see the vacancy rate reduced by 3 or 4% just from Amazon by itself, and that doesn't include any companies that are going to want to be here because Amazon is also here, or other sorts of professional services that are going to be here to try to work with Amazon.
So let's just jump in a little bit there from the community perspective. The vacancy rate has been almost up to 20%, and now it's down to 18%, but I don't think people really always understand, what does that really mean? Who cares? Arlington is unique in that we have had pretty close to a 50-50 split in our tax base, and 50% of the money has been coming from the business community, the apartment community, and 50% has been coming from the residential homeowners, and that's unique. In most communities like Fairfax or others, 70% of the money comes from the residents and only 30% comes from the business community. So The reason this is important is we love parks here. We want terrific schools. We want to support the arts, and either it gets paid for with property taxes paid by residents, or it gets paid by businesses. And so as long as we have the vacancy rate, the money is not available to support these other initiatives. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, there's one other dynamic here at play too, prospectively, is that the idea of buildings that maybe don't get vacant buildings that don't get filled by either Amazon or other companies who want to be near Amazon, or just other companies more broadly. Part of the thinking in developing the sector plan is we have a lot of aging building stock in Crystal City that that'll soon sort of face a point in time where the owner will need to decide, do they sort of reinvest in that and try and carry that building forward, or that for 10, 15, 20 more years, or do they make the decision to demolish the building and think about redevelopment? And a lot of the sector plan was focused on trying to achieve public benefit in terms of infrastructure, transportation, and open space improvements, in part by having sort of the development forms around it being redeveloped and repurposed. And I think, so there is another opportunity in which we may see the vacancy rate go down over time, to the extent that additional activity in this area will lead to redevelopment and perhaps change in use. So we may have 40-year-old, 50-year-old office buildings that come offline and are replaced by brand new residential buildings or other developments.
The other thing I want to add to this, kind of a different little bit of twist, is if Amazon really hadn't chosen Arlington, and we still had this aging stock of buildings and this vacancy rate, it is, I do this job of actually trying to recruit businesses every day to Arlington, and with that aging stock, the column spacing within the buildings, the systems, those buildings don't actually emit the type of culture that tech companies are looking for. And so it's hard to attract companies, and I think without an Amazon, I think we would have taken even longer to try to knock down that vacancy rate.
You don't have the technical infrastructure, all the things people are looking for.
And there would be no catalyst for people to want to redevelop buildings.
And many of those buildings were purpose-built for the federal government, or even more specifically for overflow of the Pentagon. And so as the economy diversifies, the building stock needs to diversify with it.
Exactly.
So this actually leads to a question I have here from Anna, who says, do we have enough real estate for Amazon to move in?
Yes.
It's a yes or no question.
Yes.
I think it's unanimous on that one. Yes, more than enough.
So let's talk a little bit about incentives, because we're getting a lot of chatter on the incentive package. Can you describe briefly kind of what the incentives are being offered here?
Yes, we can, and I'm going to let Christina start, and then I will punctuate, but I want you to talk about the transportation and the housing. Yeah.
Well, and I think, let me kind of actually take another step back, because when we do an economic development project, we actually let the state lead. And so the state actually put together a very compelling, unique economic development package in which they invested mostly into the community, and only a small portion as a direct incentive into to Amazon itself. And so they chose to invest in transportation and this talent pipeline. And we followed that lead. So a lot of the majority, 95% of our incentives or investment around this project are towards housing and transportation. So the combined transportation package for Arlington and Alexandria is $570 million, of which, if folks go to HQ Nova, there's actually a download where they can actually see all of those transportation projects. And then I don't know if you want to talk about housing real quick and what that investment looks like.
Certainly. Right, so as part of the proposal, I think on the housing side of it, what we had, the approach that we had generally taken was to look at, where we have been investing our housing resources, historically over the past 10 years, the level at which we've been investing, and then if we were to extrapolate that into the future, assuming just kind of holding things constant. And so I think where we ended up was, over the past few years, on average, all our housing resources combined for affordable housing total approximately $20 or $21 million a year. And then what we ended up doing was actually looking very closely at, into the future, where do we expect housing growth to occur, and what percentage of that growth do we expect to occur in the Crystal City, Pentagon City. And we also looked at the Columbia Pike corridor as well, given the premium transit network investments that the county is making. And sort of the better connections and accessibility that will provide for. So I think when all was said and done, we had proposed $7 million a year over 10 years into investment in those areas. Now, is there some flexibility around exactly how that's invested? Absolutely. But I think as far as the proposal is concerned, that's how we went about targeting that investment.
And then Alex can talk about
that. Yeah, so there's going to be one piece that is a pay-for-performance grant, and the way that that will be calculated is based on something called the transient occupancy tax, and we expect that the TOT, yes, which is a tax that visitors pay on their hotel room nights at a rate about 5.25%. And we're going to take a small increment of that, of the growth in the TOT. So the existing TOT tax that Arlington collects currently will remain whole. We need that for our budget. And should there be growth in the TOT, which we anticipate happening because Amazon generates a lot of hotel room stays, they generated more than 300,000 a year in Seattle. 15% of the new revenue, so 85% will come back to the county, and 15% would be converted into this grant if they meet the square footage thresholds that have been laid out. So getting to the 4 million square feet over the 12 years, or getting to the 6 million square feet over 16 years. And in addition to that, we stand to gain up to $300 million on our end in net revenue, and the incentive itself is probably going to be something more like $23 million.
So just to kind of sum up what they've said, on the
a little technical,
so a normal person could understand it.
Thank you, Sally.
Okay, so transportation, we're going to have improvements to 3 subway stops: Pentagon City, Crystal City, and one in Potomac Yards. The really exciting thing is they're going to try and have a pedestrian walkway over to National Airport. They're going to do some land. Route 1 land improvements. They're going to try and have more green space. So there's going to be a focus.
They're going to finish the transit way.
They're going to finish the transit way. And then I think 2 other points that have to be made is the state and Arlington and Alexandria were pretty unique. These are performance-based payouts. In other words, they don't get any money unless they perform. Unlike kind of the traditional business idea of incentive is, some money's put out there up front, and then then you see if they do it. They don't get anything unless they perform. So I think we should be really proud of our government leaders at both the local level and the state for doing that. And then just sort of the final point, Virginia took a pretty unique tact. It really focused on community. They focused on education. They focused on workforce. I think they really, did a tremendous job in thinking through what would work for Virginia and stay true to the values of the state and values of our communities of what they want.
And one of the, that brings up a really good point of, I know there was a lot of folks during the the last 6 months that kept asking, like, why didn't Virginia, talk about their proposal? Why wasn't there being more information out there? The fact is that Virginia and Arlington, Alexandria thought that they put together something that was really unique, and we did not want to lose the competitive edge with any of those other 19 communities that have been shortlisted, to show them how we actually took this unique approach. And I think all you have to do is look to New York and see how different their incentive package was ours. And if we would have released that information earlier, it would have given those communities a chance to pivot and offer something very similar. And so we really wanted to keep that close.
I think another attribute that was a strength for the Virginia proposal was they took the non-disclosure very seriously. I have to tell you, I woke up on the morning of our last Economic Development Commission meeting to the headline in the Washington Post that it was imminent that we were going to get it. I walked into the meeting at 8 o'clock and was advised, which I kind of already knew, is that we wouldn't be able to discuss it. So I opened the meeting by shutting down discussion of Amazon and said we wouldn't be discussing it because it turned out it wasn't being announced till 10:30 the same day.
Right.
And it was sort of conspicuous. Victor was not there and Alex was
appreciate
there instead. It's like everybody kind of thought, oh, Victor's not here. But the fact is we couldn't discuss it. And we tried to honor that commitment. And I think we were trying to show as a community that we could be trusted to keep our promises.
And I think too, the other piece is that we worked really, really hard, the state and the Arlington and Alexandria, to put together all of these materials. And so you see them on the Arlington County website. You see them on the hqnova.com website. All of this information to have it ready, that if there was and we were doing this not knowing if we were going to be selected. We put all this work together to say that if there was an announcement, here's all your information, digest it, take it in. We want to be as transparent as possible.
Yeah.
I really like the way you put that, Sally. The package is one that reflects our community values, essentially.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something that we have a couple questions on here, and they're fun ones. The Crystal City DCA walkway. When might we start to see some discussion on a walkway to the airport from Crystal City?
If I'm not mistaken, I think transportation
It's
is
already
going to be the
talking
focus
about
of
it.
another
Absolutely.
topic. I don't have
Yes, it is.
But there is a concept. There is actually already a study, the concept study on the DCA pedestrian walkway bridge.
Right.
Yes.
The Crystal City
City
bid
bid.
presented something
Yes,
to us at the Economic
exactly.
Development Commission,
Right.
saying
And
that
so
was a wish.
they had recently completed sort of
Yeah.
an initial feasibility study, and it's my understanding that we now need to move into the next stage of study and analysis to pursue the implementation of that.
Right.
Indeed, our next Engage Arlington virtual learning session will be on transportation. So we'll get more into that at that time. But in all this talk about sort of building and development, this brings up a pretty important point, is that along the way there will be opportunities for the community to weigh in as all these things come up. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So I would say that the few opportunities where the community might not have really an opportunity to weigh in will be what we see happening next year in terms of the occupancy of existing buildings, right? But beyond that, virtually all future development in Crystal City and Pentagon City is achieved through the site plan special exception process, and that requires a very thorough public process. And it requires county board approval for a site plan or development project to go forward and start pulling building permits and moving towards construction. So every instance in which a building is proposed to accommodate Amazon, we will have a process, just like our process for any other development project. At a high level, those processes. Staff works with the Site Plan Review Committee of the Planning Commission, and we work through a standard agenda. Make sure the primary goal of the committee review is to really try and iron out and kind of reconcile as many sort of details as possible before a project is really ready to start moving towards the public hearing process. And so there would be opportunities along the way. The Site Plan Review Committee always includes members of the Planning Commission. It includes representatives from affected neighborhoods or surrounding civic associations. And so there will be opportunities for folks to either work with their neighbors or work with their civic associations to have their voices heard, and opportunities to attend. All of these meetings are public open meetings.
Right.
And we try and do a thorough job of posting materials online for review and comment in a timely fashion.
And I think, and those plans are going to be spread out as they come in from Amazon over the next couple of years. We're not going to see these all like next month, right?
We hope not. And so that's sort of what we keep reminding ourselves to keep ourselves sane. But what we anticipate is probably seeing the application for the first several new buildings submitted to the county early next year. And that review process will take some time, probably middle of next year or beyond. It'll, at the point at which it's ready, it will come forward to the county board and they'll act on it. But getting back to the path of growth and the amount of square footage and how long we anticipate, how long it will take for that building space to be filled and the workers to join the Amazon workforce, Christina's absolutely right. It's, we don't expect a flood of, half a dozen Amazon-specific building proposals first quarter of next year. What we do expect is sort of a gradual kind of submission of projects over time that align well with, their need to house workers.
Yeah. But what will happen in February, though, is, or I should say no earlier than February, is the vote on the performance agreement for the incentives that Alex had just talked about. So the TOT.
Yeah, and the other one that'll be in there is a piece of this existing tax increment finance district, so this is a little obscure as well, but these will be funds for other public and community improvements that will be adjacent to the Amazon campus in some way, or have related to one of the interests that we mentioned, whether it's a transportation project or something that knits Crystal City and Pentagon City together well and sort of makes Route 1 more, more pedestrian friendly. And so that will be in this agreement in February as well.
I also want to mention that the site that we've established on the county website, which is arlingtonva.us/Amazon, that is going to continue to be updated. So people are going to be able to see as these processes kind of come online and where the opportunities to weigh in come along. That will be a living document, essentially.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so here's another Adam. This is the second Adam in our chat, who wants to know what are the projections for additional job creation in the county. We've touched on this a little bit earlier, but maybe we can kind of go back over this for Adam.
Sure. So directly related to Amazon, within 12 years, 25,000, and going out to 16 years, 37,500. And should they keep on growing beyond that? I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't currently have any information about some of these ancillary benefits or what we call the agglomeration effect of Amazon coming to Arlington. But the Fuller Institute, their study is linked from our website, did study indirect and induced impacts of Amazon coming to Northern Virginia, and what the additional job creation will look like in Virginia and for Arlington, as far as services direct to the Amazon buildings, and some of the additional jobs that would be in Arlington. But it doesn't go further than that to say, and these other companies will come here because Amazon has come.
And just to clarify, the Fuller study was done by George Mason, correct?
It was done by the Fuller Institute, which is housed within George Mason University.
Okay. And the Virginia Economic Development Partnership had initiated that with the Fuller Institute.
Thank you.
And just building from that and speaking to kind of going back to the forecasts that I spoke of earlier, what will be interesting is over time how our forecasts stand to be updated based on activity we may see in the near future. The last round of forecasts did not anticipate sort of Amazon locating their presence here. So, but that aside, I did not have that day. But putting that aside, I think our current forecasts out through 2045 anticipate, on the job side, roughly 40,000 additional jobs above and beyond current estimates. I think the housing estimates or forecasts are even a little higher, about 60,000. So, I think part of how we've thought about this is that, the idea of Amazon locating in Crystal and Pentagon cities, in a lot of ways, helps us advance and realize plans that are already in place, and helps us fulfill the forecasted growth that we are envisioning and planning to see in the county.
So we're kind of getting towards the end. I want to do, before we go away though, just a round robin of, in your opinion, what does this mean for Arlington? Let's kind of, we've been down in the weeds, let's do a big sky version and just have everybody say, what do you think this means for our community? Want to start over here with Alex?
Yeah, sure. For me, everything has now come full circle. I started working on the Crystal City plan when I began with the county. And at that time, like Anthony said, we didn't know who the end users were going to be. And now we partially know who at least one of them will be. And so the strategy at the time was to fortify an area and grow an area that was a really important source of revenue for Arlington County. And that was the core goal of the Crystal City plan. Of course, we care about land use and planning and design and transportation, energy efficiency, and parks. And so all of that came in through Arlington's great planning process. But it was initiated, like Anthony and Sally have said, by the BRAC task force that was came out of the EDC. And the reason that there was so much importance and significance put around that was that this was such an important revenue generator for the county. And so that was originally and continues to be why it is so important to our organization.
Okay, the role of the EDC is to try and sustain and accelerate the economic prosperity of the county. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of, and I think we should be, is that in all of this proposal, whether it was the state or the local folks, they stayed consistent with the values of the community. They tried to stay in alignment with what the business cared about, what the citizens cared about, and what would make us thrive. They made a proposal that really focused on workforce, education, housing, all the things that make Arlington prosperous and make us a wonderful place to live. And that's why Amazon chose us. And people who've known me for a long time, we at the EDC spent a couple years talking about values, and I distill it all down to one line. We offer small town charm and big city amenities. And that's what we offered, that's what we want, and I think they want to be our partner in keeping that vision for our citizens and our businesses.
So, as your kind of resident person who's always out recruiting and talking to businesses, I see this definitely as a game changer, number one. I'm hoping to God we will never be confused with Arlington, Texas ever again, okay? Like if I meet a company that thinks we're, Arlington, Texas, I will be very sad. But second, I think what was really a game changer also was because of the unique way we approach incentives, but also because of the partnerships that were created. I mean, think about this. Arlington and Alexandria, two really, in theory, should be competing jurisdictions, teamed up together, had to work together for 14 months to put together a joint incentive proposal to win, I'm sorry, the biggest deal in the country. Yay! It is exciting, but I think the way we approached economic development and the way we worked with our partners, not only just Alexandria, but Nova and the state, I think it's, it's going to be a new model for economic development. I'm really excited about that.
I mean, game changer,
Yep.
It's a big word. It's not a word you drop every week.
No.
So yeah, game changer values, I like this.
Yeah, I'm going to have to piggyback on that and second it. Putting I think it's just a really important moment and the start of a new chapter in Crystal City and Pentagon City's history and Arlington more broadly. But putting my regional planner cap on for a moment, it's really interesting, Christina, highlighting sort of the partnership component of it, because I do think, looking at the additional growth and potential, according to smart growth principles, that we can realize jointly with Alexandria, along the Route 1 corridor, all the way from, Braddock Road Metro, all the way to the Pentagon. You really start to see a geography that can really start to fill out and emerge. That's on par scale-wise with what we have in the Roslyn-Ballston corridor. The joke was, working closely with colleagues in the city of Alexandria, we had spoke at a panel back in April at the American Planning Association, and our inside joke, we were talking about regional partnerships and regional planning collaboration. Our only regret from that is we couldn't really talk about sort of the Amazon prospect of this all, because if we had, we would have had more than the 40 people that actually attended our session. But that aside, I think that's a really exciting opportunity for us at this point.
So exciting is sort of ringing around the table right now, and that's an important thing to mention. I want to repeat again as far as the next steps. What is going to come before the board, and when is that going to happen?
So the incentive performance agreement will be brought forward to the board hopefully no earlier than, well, it'll be no earlier than February, but we are targeting February. And that will outline what Alex had talked about was the TOT grant and as well as the tax increment financing. And then
from a development application perspective, you know, it's hard to say with any certainty because we haven't yet received the applications, but based on the conversations to date, it would think that, you know, any public process that the Planning Commission would lead working with staff and the Site Plan Review Committee, you know, people can probably expect that to ramp up towards the end of first quarter 2019. And, you know, if depending on the timeline of the review, could anticipate, you know, the board getting a recommendation on the application middle of 2019, no earlier than middle of 2019.
So, and before we get to no earlier than February 23rd, there's going to be lots more kind of opportunities to learn and talk and have these discussions. We're going to have 3 more of the virtual learning sessions: transportation, housing, schools, and workforce. They're also going to be the county board is going to have public listening sessions, in-person opportunities, I believe in December and January. There's also going to be next Monday, actually, a Kojo Namdi town hall to which everybody is invited at Cinetic Theater, I believe. And of course, we also have, as I say, this website, arlingtonva.us/Amazon. There are lots and lots of ways to get information, to, you know, let us hear what you're thinking. Hopefully, everyone is going to be satisfied with the amount of information they are able to hear as we go through this process over the next 2 months, 3 months. So I would say that brings us to the end of another Engage Arlington virtual learning session. I really appreciate everybody chiming in with their questions. I really appreciate everybody here in the studio for answering them all so diligently. And we hope you're going to join us December 6th for our next Engage Arlington virtual learning session on transportation, where we'll have many of Anthony's colleagues here, I would imagine. And we'll be taking a deep dive later, as we say, into schools and housing. Thank you very, very much for joining us here tonight, and we hope you'll be back to chat with us again on December 6th.